Do 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 do. Bang.
Hi everybody, Voorhees here, and I'm back for another hobby video tying into the first game in the Diabolical Bracket tournament, which I'm working on right now. I'm at the audio editing stage, and I'm hoping to have it done and posted 2 weeks from now. Today we're going to be taking a closer look at the stadium. I decided to build one for the Diabolical Bracket tournament early in the planning stages and had it finished for the All-Star game. A lot of the idea for it came from the stadium pieces built by Tombstone Frank, a player in the Florida Blood Bowl community. I got to see them in person while he was live streaming his games in the Three Kingdoms tournament last year, and they looked amazing. Hey, I recognize that, Griffin. I wanted mine to be a whole enclosed stadium, which would require over twice the amount of pieces, so I knew pretty early on that each of the pieces weren't going to have the level of detail that Frank's had. I also knew from planning that the hook for my stadium was going to be its modularity, and that it could be customized with new panel sections to have multiple different looks to represent various different teams, so I could get away with less detail in the construction of the main sections. I was building it out of foam board, and my plan called for 2 long bleacher sections, 2 short sections, a section behind each end zone with space for a tunnel, and 4 corner towers plus 2 thinner towers to go along the sides. To keep everything consistent throughout all the sections, I started off by making a cardstock template to use for each different size piece of foam board I would need to cut out to build each of the sections, then traced them onto the foam core as many times as I needed, and I cut them all out and labeled all of them before doing anything else. Each bleacher section has a couple of support pieces inside, though the towers are completely hollow. The section behind the end zones were basically 2 bleacher sections glued to either side of a central tower section which could be used as the tunnel. After assembling the basic sections, I used masking tape to clean up the joints and hide any rough spots, and then sprayed the outside with a stone-colored texture paint. The benches and the stands were made from popsicle sticks and then given a brown wash. The fans in attendance were all meeples, just to make Jim Luft cry. It took around 400 meeples to fill the stadium. That's a lot of frickin' meeples. One section of stands has holes drilled into the benches, and the meeples there were given pin in their foot so that they could be set up in the stands and easily moved around if I wanted to have the stop-motion effect of a very animate crowd for the cheering fan or riot result on the kickoff chart. The way the modular stadium works is that the fronts of the sections aren't permanently attached. Instead, there are slots for the front walls to be slid in. It takes 10 wall pieces of 2 different sizes to make the front facing surrounding the field. The sections I had built for the stadium for the All-Star game were just foam boards sprayed with the same stone texture paint as the rest of the sections, and then I printed some images of Blood Bowl related posters and signage and glued them on with white glue. For the tunnel sections, I just cut a door in the wall piece, and for the All-Star game I made a curtain of red yarn for one side and blue yarn for another and taped them in place, so that the members of the red and blue teams each could have their own entrance sequence. Finally, using poster board and several shades of green paint, I made the mat which covers the ground between the edge of the Blood Bowl pitch and the barrier. For the All-Star game, I used the pitch Jack Petruccia of Maelstrom mats made for the 2019 Chaos Cup in Chicago. When planning for this particular game, for a while I wasn't sure whether I wanted to do a stadium for the Corpse Feasters or for the Frightful 14. I decided to do the Corpse Feasters stadium since I had some cool ideas of things I could do with it, using the Games Workshop Chaos pitch. I thought the wall surrounding the pitch could be filled with vaults like a mausoleum so that casualties inflicted by the Corpse Feasters could be immediately interred, at least until they get hungry, and have some of the vaults open with decomposing bodies hanging out. Again, I used foam core to make the walls. First, though, I measured and drew out a template for the vaults on thin card and used it to make as many as I would need. Before I glued the vault patterns on, I peeled off the paper backing from the foam board to leave more of a rough, stone-like texture for the vaults. After that, I cut some random vaults here and there for the ones that would be open, and then I glued a backing of poster board onto each wall piece. Finally, I gave everything a couple coats of watered-down white glue. This is to protect the foam from being disintegrated by the spray primer, allowing me to give everything a quick and easy black primer before painting. I wanted to have some cloth banners hanging in the end zone pieces, so I brought out my Ziploc bagging of cloth straps made from 20-year-old pajamas that I've been saving the scraps for a dozen years or so to use in these kind of hobby projects. I dipped each piece in watered-down white glue, worked the glue in, and then wrung some of the excess liquid out and laid it out how I wanted it, trying to make some wrinkles and folds rather than just having a straight hang. For painting, I did the walls and vaults with several layers of grays and tans, going lighter with each shade, and the banners I did in a dried blood color with bright red lettering. The open vaults I left black to give the illusion that they were deeper than they are. Then it was time to hit the bits box and make some corpses. I only needed the uppermost half and in some cases was able to just use some green stuff to indicate the torso. After painting them up in appropriate colors, I made judicious use of Nurgle's Rot by Citadel Paints to give them a really gooey, juicy look. Disgusting. I also made some portcullis gates for the 2 tunnel sections, using a method I got from the DM's Craft YouTube channel. Basically, you cut a couple of thin strips of corrugated cardboard in a way that you have a line of holes along the long edges, and using some white glue, put some toothpicks in for the bars. In this case, I used kebab skewers because the door was so big I thought the bars should be a bigger scale. I thought about possibly rigging it so I could do a stop motion animation of the gate rising and players coming out of the tunnel, and figured out how I could accomplish that, but decided it was too much work and instead taped them in place on the inside of the door pieces and saved the working portcullis for a later date. For each new game, I'm going to try and add new stop motion elements in, and that'll be a good one to do for a future game. Finally, I made some flags with the Corpse Feasters logo on the computer and printed them and glued them to kebab skewers and stuck them into the sides of the two thin towers to give another scenic element. Apparently the overhead fan made them flutter slightly, and I realized while editing the footage that I accidentally got some really cool fluttering movements from them in the stop motion. Incidentally, the image on the flag is a picture I pulled up from the internet to act as the logo for the Corpse Feasters. I typed Corpse Feasters into the search engine, and that's the image that came up. The next video will be a Diabolical Sports Desk episode where Rufus and I will give a preview of the game itself. See you then!